Yo, what is up, guys? It is Lifted, and in today's video, we got something pretty cool. So we're going to be looking at cards I plan to submit while talking about the companies that I intend on sending them to. So take notes. This is a more informational video. This is feedback for the companies and strategies for new submitters. So if you're grading company staff, we got a lot of cool things to mention, some good suggestions, there's a lot of room for improvement, so hear me out. Hopefully, guys, take this to heart. These are a lot of the things that people would like to see from the community, a lot of other people's concerns. So, this would be something to not take lightly. All right, so with the $50 service back at PSA, I gotta warn you, these smaller companies are in trouble. So with more services opening up, there's going to be more traffic heading back to PSA. So that means the time to take advantage of these other companies or establish yourself as another company is running out. So all these small companies will inevitably fail, but as a result of the opportunity in the market, I got to congratulate CGC for earning a seat at the table. So now the big three, we got PSA, BGS, and now CGC. So the values for the most part will follow that order aside from maybe pristine grades. And I'll only briefly mention PSA in this video so we can highlight the other companies. And all in all, PSA is ultimately the most reliable, cost-effective service with the most valued investments, period. There are a few exceptions, but I'd say PSA is king, and there's great opportunity elsewhere now if you go about it correctly. But yeah, I'd stick to the three big names, and here's some tips to consider while using them. Okay, CGC. So before I'd consider using their services professionally, I'd still argue they have some improvements to make, but they're stepping up and their standards have proven to be quite respectable. According to their cost versus return and their services overall, I'd say they found their place in the market for grading cheaper cards intended for resale. Otherwise, when people submit more expensive ones, people will just buy with the intent to crack it open or cross-grade and ultimately pay less. And they'll continue to pay less if people don't buy for their personal collections. And that can change over time. They're just not that established yet, and not a whole lot of people are collecting these, but they're doing good. So as long as they keep it up, they'll be okay. So from there, that brings us to our first concern. And as an artist myself and a collector of art, I should mention that the labels and the design kind of lack. And I'll touch on this further on, but the next issue is actually kind of a big one. So the slabs have a history of being far too easy to crack open and potentially reseal. So a huge red flag, and actually I kind of have a bit of a experience with this myself, so take a look here.
How did they do it? Guys. Okay, so guys, we have a problem. CGC. Oh man, all it took was barely any experience in what I'm doing here. This is the first time I've ever popped a case open, so I'm going to be super careful here. But basically I just had to get my thumbnail under that little separation and it just pops open. So let's be super careful here now, because we actually have the Leafeon out of its case. Wow, just like that. You can just pop these suckers off. Wow, that was too easy. Maybe this will be a video of its own. Wow, guys, okay, so a lot of people are confused about CGC, and I just cracked a case with my bare hands, no screwdriver, no tile cutters that you'd need for PSA.
So obviously a huge security issue. People were getting subs back with the cases separating. I've heard rumors that they fixed this, but regardless, they're still out there, so be skeptical. And my other problem being the designs kind of lack and the cases feel a bit cheap, but that's okay. I kind of like the way they're clear. It does kind of put them apart from other grading companies, but the labels do look goofy and the backs look like the old PSA labels from like 20 years ago. The blue color can stay, but it's a weak design. The corner with the grade is funky. I hate that. The title and description is centered like a poem or something. I don't know. Maybe this label itself is too wide, so the text looks out of place. Just let me fix it. I'm a graphic artist. But with more professional label, I'd feel more comfortable displaying collecting CGC because their standards are respectable. So that's probably the only negative. CGC is a pretty good opportunity, and there you have it. And last but not least, that brings us to BGS. So they got premium cases, they sleeve the cards in the cases, but they are a little bulky. And, you know, they're great for expensive cards, but most importantly, they're the best service for cards in pristine condition. Huge for TCGs like Dragon Ball that have the cleanest printed cards, but otherwise, I'd only use them for that 1% of cards that are in the best condition. The chase for a black label in pristine 10 gives PSA 10s the best run for your money. PSA 10s are gems, but the pristines are even better. Though similar to CGC, I'd argue, unfortunately, this is an unrealistic standard to hold most cards to, especially for English Pokemon. So for most cards, this grade scale fails and will have much more success at PSA. And if it gets the same grade, it'll be worth more from PSA just because people collect it more and, you know, it's an easier service, so more people are still submitting to PSA. Okay, and the biggest red flag for them, it's gotta be that it's a nightmare to submit. They don't provide the same step-by-step process PSA does, and throughout the process, you basically don't know if they have your cards until they're basically shipping it back. So that better change. That's a pretty huge risk for the customer and a liability from BGS, and no peace of mind throughout the process is just not a good thing. And that doesn't really motivate people to use your service. Next thing I guess you could mention is it's also more expensive. You have to pay for subgrades, which I don't agree with. You shouldn't have to pay them to print the label properly. These subgrades are one of the main draws to using the service, and you know, these numbers are calculated regardless, so it's kind of a joke. And it's unfortunate. CGC also does this too. And I hope that there's ways to go around this in the future. Hopefully they expand enough to not have to charge for this, but I just don't understand why the biggest draw to your label, your company, is an additional charge. It's just not realistic. It's not value service. I don't know. But you can get a cheaper, you can get the cheaper option without the printed label, but that's not what people want to see. And, you know, aside from the gold label for BGS, it kind of falls behind if you get anything lower than that. And if you get lower than an 8.0 for the silver label, then they give you this hideous white paper label that basically makes your card look like junk, despite certain cards being very valuable in that poor condition. You definitely shouldn't have a lower tier or a tier lower than silver, because if I got that, I'd crack it out. And, you know, with that being said too, BGS slabs are the safest to crack open. With them being sleeved on the inside, you're taking less of a risk. So from there, that brings us to cross grading. People seem to think BGS and CGC 9.5s are the same or better than PSA 10s, but value alone proves otherwise. 9.5s are never worth more unless it's an outlier or market shift. They're not in better condition unless it's a misgrade. Sure, 9.5s can cross to PSA 10s, but only the best ones do, and 9.5s often have a white dot or two, which on PSA scale would drop straight to a 9. And that's also kind of why people send PSA 9s to try to get Gem Mint 9.5s at BGS. It goes both ways. People send PSA 10s to try to get BGS 10s or black labels because it's worth more. It's just a different system at PSA, so expect weak and strong grades, especially for cross grading. And I'd always note to buy the card, not the label. So more about different grade scales. BGS and CGC only seem more picky because they narrow it down more. Condition is a spectrum anyway, so claiming to narrow it down to that extent is often unrealistic. As a card is more damaged, there's more of a gray area, so this is open to interpretation too. So for an example, like a strong PSA 5 or 6 could be like a 6.5 or 7 elsewhere. It depends.
Plus, these 0.5s, also known as ugly grades, kind of suck. I'd much prefer weak and strong grades from PSA. The 0.5 system is less collectible. People would rather see the clean number on a slab, so it's kind of unnecessary. 0.5s are far less popular, ultimately worth less, so people don't prefer them. Honestly, I'd use all three companies, but if they restructured grading to remove most 0.5s, that could be great. A system where anything lower than an 8 or 9 would be perfect, where we wouldn't need 0.5s. Like, if they only had 0.5s for gold label cards like the 9.5s, pristine 10s, and black label 10s to separate how pristine a card is, because as you're getting that closer to perfection, that's when you can kind of narrow it down or separate. And that would be important too, because usually cards in that condition are more valuable as well. So that would be perfect, honestly. So that could be a great system. So hopefully some grading companies are taking notes here, because that could help. Because also, as I mentioned, as cards get more damaged, there's more of a gray area. So for narrowing it down for pristine cards, that's where it's at. And if you made it this far, a huge tip. Not a ton of people know this, but BGS provides this secret service for free subgrades when a mint card hits this pristine grade. So be smart, no conditions, and only submit 10 worthy cards. And if you do so, you could have great results. With that said, I should also mention how I spoke with CGC on Instagram. And as of now, they also provide this bonus too. But it's only for pristine 10s that have 10s across the board. So that's great, but that's really stingy. Should be for 10s in general, like BGS. It's already a huge challenge, and especially considering they're the newer, cheaper, less value return service, if anything, they should be the one doing that. And if they wanted to attract more people, try to get more people interested in your service, maybe do it for 9.5s too. That sounds pretty reasonable to me. I don't know how that affects you logistically. You shouldn't be charging for subgrades anyway. I'll never agree with that. But so, like I said before, for most cards, I'd definitely say PSA is the way to go, but I'd consider BGS for special submissions, the 1%, the pristine cards. But that's pretty much it. Both companies we talked about today have some room for improvement. PSA slips time to time, but they're the best for a reason. So hopefully you learned something, or I brought something to your attention. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out or check out my store and, subscribe. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. It's been lifted, and I'm out of here. Peace.